Hello, I'm Lisa Lund from Shadow Valley Quilts. This is my percussion quilt pattern, and today I'm going to walk you through it step by step. This is an awesome quilt pattern for beginner quilters because it's super easy and fun to make. If you're a more experienced quilter and you're looking for a nice, quick project, this is great for you too. We're going to be making the baby/lap size, which measures 48 by 48 inches. That's a nice, generous size for a baby quilt. The baby's not going to grow out of it right away. And it's also a nice size for anyone to have for a snuggly lap quilt. Here are my fabrics. I've washed and dried and pressed all of them just to hopefully reduce the shrinking or the bleeding issues. If you're interested, the exact names for them are fabric 1, Kona Bone, 2, Riley Blake Confetti Pewter, 3, Kona Seafoam, 4, Riley Blake Confetti Pistachio, 5, Kona Sage, 6, Kona Spruce. One nice thing about this pattern is the cutting is a piece of cake. We're going to cut 7 width of fabric strips from each of fabrics 2 through 6. Then from fabric 1, which is the background fabric, we're going to cut 16 large squares and 4 slightly smaller squares. So here are our pieces. We have 7 width of fabric strips from each of fabrics 2 through 6, 16 larger squares and 4 smaller squares of the background fabric. And that's it. There's one more step in the cutting. We're going to take each of the 16 larger background fabric squares and cut them in half diagonally. This is going to give us 32 right triangles. So here are all of the pieces ready to start piecing. You'll notice each of these width of fabric strips are different lengths depending on the fabric. We're going to take care of that in the next step before we sew them together. We're going to divide these fabric strips up into 7 sets, 1 from each color. So there's 5 colors in each set. Stack them on top of each other, and then we're going to trim them so that they're all exactly the same length, just as long as the shortest piece. And we're going to lay them out in the order of fabrics 2 through 6. You can see I have fabric 2 on the bottom going up through fabric 6. And we're going to be sewing them together in this order. Now, in order to have a nice flat fabric strip set, we're going to pin those pieces together before we sew them. We've already trimmed them to the exact same length each, and we're going to pin them together before we sew them. This way the fabric won't shift or stretch, and we'll get a nice flat set. So we're ready to sew our strips together. Now, this is an important note. We're not going to use a scant 1/4 inch seam like you do in a lot of quilts. You want to use a full 1/4 inch seam, or maybe even a thread or 2 larger than a 1/4 inch seam. I would call that a generous 1/4 inch. This is not a deal breaker. It's not going to ruin your quilt if you do a scant seam, but it'll just make your result a little bit better in the next step. I'll show you what I mean soon. So full 1/4 inch to slightly generous is going to give you a better result, but it's nothing to really stress about. This quilt is not a quilt to stress over. It's pretty forgiving one way or the other. Once you've got all 7 of your strip sets sewn together, you're going to press the seam allowances open and give them all a nice pressing. Make sure they're all nice and smooth and straight. So now comes the fun part. I'm going to lay out all 7 of the strip sets in the same direction. You can see I've got fabric 2 on top, fabric 6 on the bottom. All of them are going to be laid out in the same orientation. Now we're going to take the triangle pieces that we cut in the beginning, and we're going to lay them out, 5 of them on each strip. Now we're going to line up the long edge of the triangle with the edge of the strip. This is where you'll notice if you used a scant or a generous seam allowance. If you've used a full 1/4 inch or slightly generous, these triangles are going to fit nicely on here. You won't have too much left over where the tip of the triangle meets the edge. If you've used a scant 1/4 inch, you'll have a little bit more left over here at the tip. Not a big deal. It's just that you won't have quite as much of that fabric showing in the tip of your triangle. So if you use that full 1/4 inch or a little bit generous 1/4 inch, you'll just have the stripes be a little more evenly distributed in your triangle. So not a big deal. The other thing you need to remember here, you've got 7 strip sets. You can see on these 2 strip sets, I have laid them out in different I've laid out the 5 triangles in different patterns. The strip on the top, I have 3 triangles with the long edge along fabric 2 along the top. And then I have 2 triangles along the bottom. The strip on the bottom was the opposite. There were only 2 triangles with the long edge along the top. There were 3 triangles with the long edge along the bottom. That's an important distinction. You have 7 strips. You're going to lay out 3 of those strips following the pattern shown on the top here. You're going to lay out 4 of them following the pattern shown on the bottom. That's all clearly demonstrated in the pattern. This way you'll end up with the correct number of triangles from each orientation. Your goal is to have 16 triangles with fabric 2 along the bottom, 16 with fabric 6 along the bottom. Right here is my fabric or my strip set number 7. I only have 2 triangles left over. I don't have 5 for this one because we only need 32. We only have 32 of these background fabric triangles. We only need 32 striped triangles. If we were to cut 5 from each of the 7 strips, we'd end up with 35. So you're going to have a little bit left over on your last strip when you're cutting it. You're only going to cut 2. Now keep an eye out when you are cutting it. Make sure you just double check as you're cutting. Make sure you end up with 16 triangles that are from each orientation. 16 that have the number fabric 2 along the bottom, 16 that have fabric 6 along the bottom. And like I said, you will end up with a little extra fabric here. And there's extra fabric from each of the other strips from the edges. It's all this nice, fun, striped triangle fabric. So I'd love to see if anybody has any fun ideas of what to do with it. I have not done anything with mine yet. So if you have any ideas, let me know. But for now, we're just going to set them aside. So the fabric that we have ready to go, we have 16 sets of squares or triangles here from each direction. We have 16 with the fabric 6 along the long side and 16 with fabric 2 along the long side. And we're ready to sew them into blocks. So we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along the long side of the triangle to create our quilt blocks. Then press the seam allowance open and they're ready for trimming. Each quilt block needs to be trimmed to 8.5 inches square. A rotary cutting board can be helpful here, as well as a square ruler with diagonal lines. On ShadowValleyQuilts.com, we do sell these square rulers, 8.5 inches, with the diagonal lines, or you can use any ruler to trim them to the right size. So here we have our 16 of each orientation of the striped blocks and our original 4 background square blocks that we didn't cut into triangles. And I'm going to lay them out according to the pattern directions. Now this is a good time before you sew the blocks together to take a look at the connections between the blocks. Now where the stripes come together, take a look and see if they're matching up. Some blocks will just naturally match up better with other blocks. This right here, you can see this block is not matching well where it is. So we're going to switch it out. The center block is the trickiest because it has to match in 4 different spots. So I'm going to find a block that's the same orientation and swap it out and see if I can find a better match for that. If you can see, a lot of these blocks don't need to match anywhere. And so it's easy. They don't have to, there's no seams that have to line up. Now see this square here, this block matches much better in that spot. So once I have those center 4 lining up well, I can move out, make sure that all the other seams are lining up. Now they don't have to be 100% perfect. These lines are cut on the bias and there's a little bit of give to them. So when you're sewing them together, you have a little bit of room to stretch and get them to kind of move to fit each other, fit the seams together. But the better you can get them to fit at this stage, if you can get them to match up as well as you can, the easier time you'll have when you're sewing it together. And some, like if they came from the same strip set, they're going to match up better than some that came from maybe a different strip set. So just go over, look them over carefully, rearrange where you can to try and get it to fit together. It'll save you a little bit of work and a little bit of heartache in the next step. So now we're ready to sew them together. We're going to sew together again with a 1/4 inch seam. And where you don't have to match any seams, like the first few, it's easy. Just sew it together carefully with a 1/4 inch seam. And then where you do have seams coming together, just be very careful. Take it slow. See, that matches up pretty well. So take it slow, go 1 seam at a time, give it a little stretch if you need to kind of fit those seams together. So look at each seam as you go, and you can usually get it to fit pretty well. If they don't match exactly, it's still going to look just fine. See, that turned out pretty well. So sew your whole strip, your whole row together. So each of the 6 rows together, and then you're going to press the seam allowances open again. Give them a nice pressing and get all your rows sewn together. And you can see I've got all the rows done. Then it's time to sew the rows together and make your quilt. At this point, you're going to match up each of the seams and put a pin in to make sure you get those seams together. And same thing when you come across blocks that are matching up with other blocks that have those stripes coming together. Just be very careful, take it slow, and match them up as well as you can. Give it a good press. And we've got a nice finished quilt top. Wasn't that easy? I quilted this one on my long arm machine using a panto called Orange Peel Drop by Quilting Together with Mindy. And I bound it with the fabric, let's see, it's fabric 5. And that's our finished quilt. I hope you enjoyed making this quilt with me today. If you'd like to make your own, the percussion pattern's available at shadowvalleyquilts.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. See you next time. Bye.